Have you ever noticed yourself praying the same words while your heart feels distant? Have you ever asked God for things, but avoided letting Him truly change you? Have you ever left prayer feeling comforted, but not transformed? Saint Teresa of Ávila, one of the greatest masters of prayer in Christian history, would shock many modern believers with how direct she was about this. For her, prayer was not about saying the right words. It was about entering into real, transforming friendship with God. And this is where many souls unknowingly fall into patterns of prayer that sound religious, but keep the heart at a distance. Teresa did not see prayer as a performance. She saw it as an encounter, a living relationship, a space where truth matters more than eloquence, where honesty matters more than formulas, where surrender matters more than repetition. This is why she would strongly warn against certain types of prayer, not because they are sinful in themselves, but because they can quietly prevent the soul from entering real intimacy with God. The danger is subtle. A prayer can be frequent and still shallow. A prayer can be beautiful and still protective. A prayer can be emotional and still avoid true surrender. Saint Teresa's mystical wisdom exposes 3 common patterns of prayer that can keep the soul circling around God instead of entering deeply into Him. Not because God refuses to listen, but because the soul is not truly opening. Many people pray to feel better. Teresa prayed to be transformed. Many people pray to manage God. Teresa prayed to be possessed by God. Many people pray to remain safe. Teresa prayed to surrender control. This difference changes everything. Prayer, in Teresa's understanding, is not meant to protect your comfort. It is meant to purify your love. It is meant to rearrange your interior world. It is meant to bring you into truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. This is why certain types of prayer, though common, can quietly limit what God is able to do in the soul. They keep prayer at the level of words. They keep prayer at the level of emotion. They keep prayer at the level of control. Teresa would say, real prayer is a doorway into self-knowledge, humility, and surrender. And anything that avoids these will eventually stall spiritual growth. This is not meant to create fear. It is meant to create freedom. Because when prayer becomes real, it becomes dangerous to the ego and powerful for the soul. So before we name the 3 types of prayer Saint Teresa would warn you about, understand this. God is not looking for perfect prayers. He is looking for honest hearts. He is not impressed by language. He is moved by surrender. And sometimes the prayers we repeat most are the very ones that keep us from that surrender. Saint Teresa of Ávila taught that one of the greatest obstacles to true prayer is the refusal to truly know oneself before God. This does not mean self-hatred. It means honest self-knowledge. A soul that avoids seeing itself clearly will also avoid letting God heal it deeply. This type of prayer sounds spiritual. It uses correct words. It asks for blessings. It thanks God. It may even be emotional. But it carefully avoids looking at the heart. It avoids questions like, what am I really attached to? Where am I resisting God? What patterns keep repeating in my life? What fears control my decisions? What sins or compromises have I normalized? Teresa insisted that humility and self-knowledge are the foundation of deep prayer. Without them, prayer becomes surface level. The soul talks to God, but does not let God talk to the soul. This is dangerous not because God is absent, but because the soul remains protected. Many people use prayer as a spiritual hiding place. They stay in generalities. They pray beautiful prayers, but they never allow God to touch the uncomfortable places. Teresa would say, you cannot heal what you refuse to see. The Holy Spirit gently invites the soul into truth, but truth requires courage. It requires allowing God to reveal attachments, pride, resentment, wounds, and fears. This kind of prayer avoids that. It keeps things safe. It keeps things polite. It keeps things controlled. But real prayer, according to Teresa, is not polite. It is honest. It brings the soul face to face with itself, in the presence of mercy. This is not condemnation. It is invitation. Self-knowledge in prayer does not lead to despair. It leads to humility, and humility opens the door to grace. When a soul refuses this, prayer becomes a monologue. Words go up but transformation does not go down. Teresa would strongly warn, do not use prayer to avoid conversion. Prayer is meant to change you, not just comfort you. If prayer never challenges your self-image, it may be protecting you more than transforming you. This is why Teresa considered self-knowledge one of the first rooms in the interior castle. Without entering it, deeper union with God remains blocked. Real prayer is not afraid of truth, because truth, when held by God, becomes healing. Saint Teresa of Ávila was extremely clear about this. Many people do not truly pray. They negotiate. They come to God with fixed expectations, fixed outcomes, fixed ideas of what God should do, how he should act, and when he should respond. This type of prayer is subtle. It often sounds faithful. It is filled with requests. It may even be intense. But beneath it is control. The soul is not saying, well, your will be done. The soul is saying, my will, but with your approval. Teresa saw this as a major spiritual blockage, because real prayer is not about bending God to our plans. It is about bending the soul to God's wisdom. This kind of prayer treats God like a solution provider, not a lord. The soul comes with agendas, timelines, conditions, emotional ultimatums. If God does not respond in a certain way, disappointment, bitterness, or doubt quickly follows. Teresa would say, this is not trust, it is disguised fear. Fear of surrender, fear of losing control, fear of being led somewhere uncomfortable. So the soul prays, but only within safe boundaries. This is why many people become frustrated in prayer. They are speaking but not listening. They are asking but not yielding. They are praying but still holding the steering wheel. Real prayer requires abandonment. Abandonment does not mean passivity. It means openness. It means allowing God to lead even when the path is unclear. Teresa believed that God often delays or redirects prayers not to punish, but to free the soul from self-centered expectations. This kind of prayer limits God because it limits surrender. If you only trust God to act in ways you already agree with, you're not truly trusting God. You are trusting your own judgment. Teresa would challenge the soul with this uncomfortable truth. If prayer never rearranges your plans, you may not be truly praying. Real prayer says, not my comfort, but your will, not my timing, but your wisdom, not my control, but your love. This prayer is frightening to the ego, but it is liberating to the soul, because surrender opens space for God to act in ways you could never design. Prayer that controls God remains shallow. Prayer that surrenders to God becomes transforming. Teresa would say, the soul that truly abandons itself becomes teachable, flexible, and spiritually alive. And without this surrender, prayer becomes another way to protect the self, instead of lose the self in God. Saint Teresa of Ávila insisted that authentic prayer is not only speaking to God, it is allowing God to speak to the soul. And this requires silence, interior silence, exterior silence, the courage to stop filling every space with words, thoughts, and emotions. This type of prayer is extremely common. The soul prays constantly, but never listens. It fills prayer with noise, with many words, with many requests, with many reflections, with many religious thoughts, but it never becomes still. Teresa would say, this is not dialogue, it is spiritual noise. The soul is afraid of silence because silence removes control. In silence, God can touch what words protect. In silence, God can reveal what activity hides. This is why many people feel uncomfortable with quiet prayer. They become restless, distracted, bored. They feel the urge to fill the space, to do something, to say something. But Teresa taught that silence is where God works most deeply, not because God is absent in words, but because words often keep the soul at the surface. Silence allows God to penetrate deeper than language. This kind of prayer avoids that depth. It stays busy, it stays active, it stays safe. But real contemplative prayer, the kind Teresa lived and taught, requires the courage to stop speaking and begin receiving, not forcing thoughts, not controlling images, not filling every moment with speech, just being present. This does not mean abandoning vocal prayer. Teresa loved vocal prayer, but she insisted that prayer must mature into listening, into quiet awareness, into loving attention. Without silence, prayer becomes one-sided. With silence, prayer becomes union. This is why Teresa would strongly warn against a prayer life that never enters stillness. Because without stillness, the soul remains on the outside of the mystery. Silence is not empty. Silence is full of God's presence, full of God's guidance, full of God's transforming action. The soul that avoids silence avoids surrender at the deepest level. This is why this third type of prayer is so dangerous. It looks active, but it resists intimacy. Saint Teresa would say, if prayer never becomes quiet, it may never become deep. Final integration. Saint Teresa of Ávila is not telling souls to stop praying. She is teaching them how to pray more truthfully. She warns against prayer that avoids self-knowledge, prayer that controls instead of surrenders, prayer that speaks but never listens, not to condemn, but to invite. Because beyond these patterns is a deeper prayer, a prayer that transforms, a prayer that humbles, a prayer that unites, prayer that knows itself, prayer that abandons itself, prayer that becomes still. This is the prayer that changes not just circumstances, but the soul. And this is the prayer Saint Teresa believed leads the soul from talking about God to living in God. Saint Teresa of Ávila never exposed spiritual errors just to criticize them. She exposed them to free the soul. And if these three types of prayer have touched you, the response is not shame. The response is correction, gentle, firm, and practical, because Teresa would insist prayer is friendship, and friendship cannot grow without truth, surrender, and listening. So what do you do instead? 1. Replace avoidance with honest self-knowledge. Before you pray well, Teresa would want you to stand truthfully, not to analyze yourself endlessly, but to stop hiding. She would encourage a simple beginning like, Lord, I don't even know what is happening inside me, but you know. Show me what I keep excusing. Reveal what I keep avoiding. Give me humility without crushing me. This is not self-accusation. It is openness. Self-knowledge becomes holy when it is done in God's presence, not in isolation. Alone, self-knowledge becomes anxiety. With God, self-knowledge becomes humility, and humility becomes the strongest foundation for growth. 2. Replace control with surrender that stays faithful. Teresa would not tell you to stop asking for things. She would tell you to stop attaching your peace to outcomes. She would teach the soul to pray like this, Lord, I ask for this, but I trust you more than I trust my request. I desire relief, but I desire your will more. Lead me, even if I don't understand where. This is the difference between a request and a demand. Real prayer asks boldly, and then yields deeply. It holds desires in open hands. It doesn't threaten God with disappointment. 3. Replace noise with a few minutes of real stillness. Teresa's remedy for restless prayer is not complicated. Begin to stay with God without filling the room with words. A few minutes, simple attention, loving presence, not forcing thoughts, not chasing feelings, not hunting for signs. Just a quiet turning of the heart toward God. Here I am. You are here. I belong to you. Teresa would say, even if you feel nothing, stay. The value is not what you feel. It is what you offer. Your presence, your attention, your consent. And over time, prayer becomes less like speaking at God and more like being with Him. Saint Teresa of Ávila would end this teaching with a warning, but also with hope. The warning. If prayer remains a habit of avoidance, control, and noise, the soul may stay religious for years without entering deep transformation. Not because God is unwilling, but because the soul is still guarding the door. Teresa's interior castle is clear. There are many rooms, many stages, many depths, but you cannot enter further if you refuse truth, surrender, and silence. A soul can pray daily and still remain trapped in itself. That is the tragedy Teresa wanted to prevent, the promise. But the moment a soul starts praying honestly, even if awkwardly, God responds. Not always with emotional comfort, not always with immediate solutions, but with something better, a new interior life. Teresa would tell you that God is not looking for impressive prayers. He is looking for a soul that stops pretending. When you pray with self-knowledge, you become humble. When you pray with surrender, you become free. When you pray with silence, you become receptive. And these three together open the door to real communion. So here is the practical Teresa test for your next prayer time. Truth. Lord, here is what is really in me. Surrender. Do what you want, not what I demand. Silence. I will stay and listen. If you can do only that, even for a few minutes, you are no longer praying in the three harmful ways. You are beginning real prayer. And according to St. Teresa of Ávila, real prayer always leads somewhere. Deeper inward, deeper upward, deeper into God. Not quickly, not loudly, but truly.